In this video, I'm going to give you 2 sanding suggestions to help you make better bowls and boxes. And these suggestions are particularly important when you have a big investment in materials and labor, as in this box, which used some of my very precious small store of ebony. Now, the first of these sanding suggestions, or tips, or tricks, or whatever you want to call them, is extremely high-tech. Let me show you the latest acquisition in my shop. I was unable to get a drum sander until we moved to larger quarters, since this would not fit in a one-car garage that had to get a car in it. This is the Supermax 1938 drum sander, and it's an absolutely fabulous piece of equipment. It does exactly what it's supposed to do, and does it very well. It also necessitates another piece of equipment, a dust collection unit, because it does generate a lot of dust. You may know this is a tool that you use when you do glue-ups for wider tabletops and other serious things like that. I use it primarily at this point when I do glue-ups for center rings, other kind of laminations where I need it to be absolutely flat. Let me show you what I mean. The center ring of this box was made from a glue-up using 1/4-inch pieces of wood. The identical glue-up using 1/2-inch pieces of wood looks like this. This has been glued up and it's been sanded so that it's absolutely flat on both sides. As those of you who do bowls know, you need your rings to be flat and the sides parallel to each other. I use it here for a kind of glue-up that I often use where I take a circle, divide it in half, insert a strip, let that dry, cut it in half, insert another strip, and it's extremely versatile. It lets you get nice brickwork patterns if you go to, let's say, 16 segments. I stopped here at 8 segments because that was sufficient for my purposes. Put it through the drum sander so that both sides are flat. Surfaced it to the thickness that I wanted, and the drum sander is excellent for that. And this one can handle small and thin pieces of wood beautifully. I didn't even need my push stick to push it through. It just fed through really very well. And at this point, I'll put layers of veneer on top and on bottom to give it a touch of elegance before I cut out the rings. All right, so this is one high-tech piece of equipment. I'm not suggesting you run out and buy one, but if you have the room in your shop, it certainly is a lovely thing to have, and I'm sure you'll find many, many uses for it. Now, the other piece of equipment is at the other end of the spectrum. It consists of a 12 by 12 granite tile from the big box store, any color. I chose basic black because I think that was the only color they had. And I attached a sheet of sandpaper. This is 120 grit. I'd use 120 or 150 with temporary bond adhesive. So it forms a nice flat surface. And this is used in a very special way. All right, this is a simple one-ring bowl, if you will. It was meant to be the top of a little pedestal stand to hold something like my cupcake boxes or something like that. But it serves as well as a more elaborate setup by way of example. Once you've cut your rings, the instructions always say to look for spaces between them. Well, we're not kidding when we talk about spaces between them. Any little space has the potential to make your project really ugly. All right, let's see if we can get a good spot here to show you a space. All right, using a little flashlight, and you can put this inside the bowl, you look at your rings and you'll see where there are spaces. Another way you can do this is to take a sheet of paper, thin strip, and work it around the sides and see where it sticks. If your ring is absolutely flat, you won't see any light and you won't be able to get the little strip in. Now the temptation is to mash it down if it doesn't fit. Say, all right, there's some flex here. We will glue it down, put it in the bowl press, and we'll squeeze the heck out of it, and it will be nice. Now sometimes you're lucky. And this is one ring and it's flexible. But if you're gluing up a set of rings which is not flexible, it's rigid, and try to get it onto a base, and try to mash it down, even if it looks good, what's going to happen is that it will separate ever so slightly. Now, what do I mean by ever so slightly? Well, this is one of the boxes from my box book. And when I sent it in to the publisher for photography, I marked two sides with blue tape that said no. And this is why I marked them. When I was gluing this up, there was the tiniest, most insignificant looking space on two sides, on this face and on this face. The other two faces were perfect. This is what you want to see. When I pressed it closed, it looked as though the space were closed up, so I said, let me go ahead and glue it up. Once I glued it up, and it dried, I looked at it, and I saw that it really did not work, even though I couldn't have predicted that. And here I had this elaborate project using all my best wood, a lot of time. I was not about to remake it. So I did something that authors do. They often put the bad side in the back, and no one will ever know, except me. And it bothered me, because I knew there was a way out. And here's what you do about it. You would think you could just shove a ring in a drum sander and it would flatten itself out. But when you put it through a sander like that, you have pressure on it. You're talking about minute forces that apparently are released when you cut your rings, because you can start out with a blank that's absolutely flat. You can check it out on a cast iron table. You cut it and the little genies appear, because wood is what it is and it does what it does. So that you may end up with rings that as you stack them, you see the little spaces. If you try to sand them just by rubbing it uniformly here, it's not going to work. It seems like it should. You say both sides seem to be flat, but these forces don't want to be forced down. So you have to play with them. You have to trick them. What you do is you look for the spots that are a little higher than the others, which means the others are lower. You selectively sand. And let me change my angle so I can do this better. What you might do, if let's say this is a high spot, I lay it flat and I gently rub it. And then I check. And I keep on doing that. And if I'm doing it in the proper location, little by little, the gap is going to close. It really does work. It sometimes may take as much as a half an hour. And if you get impatient, just leave it and come back. But if you keep going, and if you have to put the whole ring on the sandpaper, you can still push selectively, so you put in a little bit more pressure. You're taking off these little minute places just where it's out of alignment. What your goal is to have the rings sit absolutely flat with no pressure on them. This makes it easier to glue up because you're not using the press to force things together. And if you've ever tried to unwarp wood by gluing it together, it usually does not work. Sometimes you get lucky, but usually you don't. So this is by far the superior way. And if you work with more elaborate projects that use multiple set of rings, so you're dealing with putting together, say, two sets that are quite rigid, it becomes very important to get all of these spaces out of them. And what happens then when you've gotten it right is you look at it, and by the way, maple is particularly unforgiving for some reason. Some wood seem to hide the grain, the separation better than others. Maple is not one of them. What you'll see is nothing that reveals any gap. You may see a line, but that's the nature of the ring. But you won't see this line, which is actually a thin line of glue. It'll hold together, but it will annoy you every time you look at it, and it's completely unnecessary. So there you have two suggestions, one of them high-tech, one of them extremely low-tech, and both of them will help give you a much better project, which is important if you're always looking to make each one just a little nicer than the one that went before. Thanks for watching, and if you can't afford the drum sander, at least get the tile and the sandpaper and give it a go. Thanks a lot and have fun.